From the very first day of Jackson's presidency, the battle lines were drawn, and the tactics were already on display. On one side stood signals of superiority, order, and institutional authority, the banking interests. On the other stood the raw, unfiltered force of mass democratic support, shaped by the lived experience of exclusion, humiliation, and repeated economic betrayal. For the first time in the nation's short history, the competing ethics, philosophies, and ideologies that had long clashed and fused in the building of the United States were now fully crystallized into opposing political parties. In Part 1, we saw how a vision for a self-sustaining American empire took shape, one that relied on protective tariffs, concentrated banking power, and the deliberate elevation of domestic industry. This framework openly channeled advantage toward banks and industrialists in the belief that their strength would secure the nation as a whole. That vision became known as the American system. Andrew Jackson moved to reverse those tariffs, allowing Southern plantation owners to better afford the tools and everyday manufactured goods necessary to run their operations profitably. But he did so gradually, giving Northern industrialists time to improve efficiency and lower costs in order to compete with Britain, which at the time was deep into its own industrial revolution and capable of producing many goods at prices American producers could not yet match. Jackson did not enter office as a man already at war with the bank. He moved carefully within the political field, even working closely with men who would soon become his most determined opponents. None more important than Nicholas Biddle, the president of the Second Bank of the United States. Biddle was everything Jackson was not. Young, polished, and aristocratic in bearing, he dressed immaculately, spoke with precision, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the machinery of finance was best entrusted to those trained to operate it. He looked like authority, and in Washington, appearance mattered. Despite this contrast, Jackson initially worked with Biddle. Together, they discussed plans to pay down the national debt, a goal both men supported. At the same time, Jackson quietly consulted with advisors and political allies who would later stand against him, laying the groundwork to loosen, and eventually dismantle, the link between the federal government and the national bank. Then, in 1829, the first warning shot was fired. It was not an open attack. Jackson did not declare war on the bank. Instead, in his annual message to Congress, he raised measured doubts about the bank's role in controlling the nation's currency and questioned its constitutional legitimacy. He even praised certain aspects of its operation. But woven through that restraint was a clear signal: reform was coming. This ambiguity was intentional. It kept Jackson's opponents off balance while allowing him to consolidate support in Congress and continue feeding the moral energy of his populist base. On the surface, he appeared cooperative. Beneath it, the direction of travel was unmistakable. Biddle understood this, and while the public exchange remained polite, both men recognized what was unfolding. When Jackson's re-election approached, restraint gave way to calculation. And that is when the real first shots of the bank war were fired. Biddle's plan was simple, and in his own mind, unbeatable. The bank's charter, the legal authority that allowed it to exist and operate as the nation's central financial institution, was not due to expire until 1836. Throughout its history, that charter had been constitutionally contested and politically controversial. The bank's place in American life was precarious. By forcing an early recharter in the heat of Jackson's 1832 re-election campaign, Biddle aimed to lock in the bank's future and corner the president into a public choice. If Jackson supported the bank, he would betray his instincts and alienate the mass of ordinary voters who had carried him to power. If he opposed it, he would provoke Congress and risk losing the institutional support he needed to govern. Either way, Biddle believed Jackson would pay a political price. It was a classic financial hedge. Heads, the bank wins. Tails, Jackson loses. And from Biddle's perspective, whichever way the coin landed, the bank would emerge intact. However, Biddle made a mistake no political opponent can afford to make when facing a battle-hardened man like Andrew Jackson. He underestimated him. He tried to pin him into a corner, but misread the room entirely. Expecting a soldier to capitulate under pressure is not strategy, it is naivete. Biddle assumed Jackson would do what many presidents before him had done, sign reluctantly or refuse to champion the bank while quietly deferring the decision to Congress, absolving himself of responsibility and avoiding direct confrontation. Instead, Jackson absorbed the first blow and escalated the conflict. He rejected the bill outright, attaching a formal veto message that framed the bank as an enemy of the people. Though that message was formally directed to Congress, Jackson knew exactly where his real audience lay, who would hear him, and who would reject him regardless. He did not waste time courting his enemies. The message was written for his political base. In it, Jackson argued that the bank was unconstitutional because the Constitution did not explicitly grant Congress the power to create such a corporation. He claimed it violated states' rights by operating without their consent and condemned it as a monopoly that enriched wealthy elites, including foreign stockholders, at the expense of ordinary Americans. He described the recharter as a gratuity of many millions to the rich, warned that it concentrated dangerous levels of power over currency and credit in a single institution, and portrayed the bank as a corrupting force in politics itself. Most importantly, Jackson framed the veto as an act of defense of the people themselves, farmers, mechanics, and laborers, against aristocratic privilege.